Hey everybody, welcome to Two Out the First. Great to have you here with us. It's March 4th, 2025. I am Ryan Ballingy. Thanks for being here. We have plenty to talk about. We haven't done a show in a little while, but we've got a new setup for you here inside the Golf Newsnet studios. Expect some changes behind me in the coming weeks. Make it a little prettier, make it a little bit more vibrant. Just make it look like, a place where TV stuff happens. So we're going to be doing that here in the next couple of weeks. And what you don't see behind the camera is all of the changes happening in the studio. So very, very excited to have those come out in the next couple of weeks, as you'll see it on GNN TV here and elsewhere. We got plenty to talk about today. I was out of town last week. I was on my family golf trip down in Orlando, Florida, the Old Greensburg Cup. We had Harry Caravaggio win for the first time ever. Been doing this tournament. Well, I haven't been doing this tournament. I'm almost 42. They've been doing this tournament for basically 35 years. And the guy who won it this year is the first time he's ever won it, has basically been on almost all of them. Pretty incredible for Harry Caravaggio. Super happy for him. Long live the champ. One of the biggest Ric Flair fans you're ever going to find as well. So congrats to him on the win. Now let's get down to business. And let's start by talking about the big news on the graphic. So we've been seeing this a little bit. I've been seeing it, hearing it in the kind of back chatter part of the world, but also been seeing a little bit more in the front-facing world. Some indications of stuff that we've talked about here on this show for probably the better part of 6 months, maybe a year. And I think it's starting to kind of hit with people, is the reality that LIV Golf contracts are starting to come to an end after this particular season. And that could portend some problems for LIV Golf. It could create some benefits for the PGA Tour, and that it may go a long way in explaining why the deal between the PGA Tour and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia hasn't been totally finished. Let's put it that way, in terms of negotiating terms between what the kind of investment you're going to get from the Saudis, what happens to LIV, and all of that stuff. So let's dig into that today for most of the show. Then we'll finish by talking about some exemptions that Jordan Spieth got and wishes he got this week, as well as the solidification of the TGL playoffs after last night's couple of matches. So we've talked about this for a little while on the show, that LIV Golf signed their players to contracts of 3, 4, and 5 years. For the most part that I've heard are 3 and 4 years. In the lawsuits that were filed when LIV was originally created, and they had to submit documentation on the LIV side about these contracts, we got them of Hudson Swafford and of Taylor Gooch. Not in full, but for pretty much what the contract says. And those contracts were for 3 years. And players got paid a lump sum of money. That was redacted. But you got a lump sum of money up front. Then you agreed to play all of the LIV events for the duration of that contract. And if you had an injury, then that could be extended, et cetera, et cetera. In case Hudson Swafford, that happened by 1 whole year. So that's what the contract effectively states. You are a LIV employee. You work for LIV. You work under those terms of that contract until it ends. Well, for the bigger players, obviously the money was much higher, but those contracts weren't that much longer. Again, 3, 4, 5 years. I didn't see any 5s, but I would imagine that Dustin Johnson and Phil Mickelson are in that kind of 5-year category. The rumor is John Rahm's is a 3-year deal. So this would be year 2 of 3, right? And the thinking is that Bryson DeChambeau's contract is set to expire and Brooks Koepka's contract is set to expire. So 2 of the biggest superstars, 2 guys who have won majors while on LIV and have been the 2 people that have probably given the most credence to the concept that you could play on LIV and still play championship level golf, still play world-class golf, like amid all of the people who snicker and laugh that they're playing 54-hole events with shotgun starts and 54 players, right? And it's really a 10-person league. So amid all that, you've got these contracts that are going to expire. And Fred Couples, who still talks to Brooks Koepka fairly regularly, and I think everybody loves Freddie, so anyone would talk to him at any time. Well, Fred Couples said, I believe this came out over the weekend, maybe it was on Monday, that Brooks wants to get back on the PGA Tour. He wants to come back and play golf on the PGA Tour. And that his contract's coming up, basically they've got to pay out the wazoo on the LIV side to keep him, because Brooks made his money. He was very, I think, open in saying that he signed with LIV because he, at the time, feared his career was at a stalemate because of the injury issues to his knees. and that he just thought he was never going to get back to a place where he could be a championship level golfer, a major championship winning player. Well, proved himself wrong. He's got five major titles now. He's in all the majors. He doesn't really have to worry about. He won 4 live titles. I mean, and those things he doesn't even care about. So he's winning pretty much every way you can go. He's made plenty of money. He doesn't need any more. And I think at this point probably recognizes, hey, what the PGA Tour has put together is pretty solid. It's not a slate of 14 tournaments, but it is effectively a 17 tournament schedule plus the majors on the PGA Tour. So you're not playing that much more between Live Golf or the PGA Tour. You have access to effectively the same money. I would argue you have access to more money on the PGA Tour week to week because you've got the FedEx Cup at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. You've got the Comcast Business Tour Top 10, which is just free money thrown at the top players. You obviously have the signature events. Those are all $20 million with either 3.6 or $4 million to the winner. You got the players, $4.5 million to the winner. The majors are the majors regardless of which tour you play, right? So that doesn't really factor into his decision-making. He's got access to all four of them, right? So if he wants to still play and go play against Scotty Scheffler, go play against Rory McIlroy, and go play against Xander Schauffele week to week to week, maybe that's enough to draw him back to the PGA Tour. And Bryson DeChambeau's in a similar situation, right? He took the money, not knowing where his career was going to be. He was at a bit of a stalemate in his career. He had kind of done his weight gain thing. He had won a U.S. Open. He had decided, hey, that's not as healthy. I'm going to start to lose the weight. And kind of got to where he is now, but knew he was unpopular in terms of kind of social recognition. He knew that money could go a long way for him. It's not like he came from a super rich background. And he just went for it, right? And he took that opportunity to build a personal brand for himself, build a presence outside of golf. He's made a tremendous amount of money doing those things and earned a tremendous amount of notoriety. He's learned how to be a character, whether that's him or not, I don't care, in front of the fans to get them to love him. He's figured out how to do all of those things while being on LIV. Now he could take those things potentially and go back to the PGA Tour. Now here's the rub in all of this, right? This is a one-person market, a one-buyer market. And we've talked about this before, but there's one buyer. That's LIV. LIV spent more than $5 billion by, I think, pretty generous estimates. Could be even higher than that, but I'll say $5 billion by some pretty professional estimates on this product, right? They don't have a ton to show for it. Yes, they are on Fox, right? That's cool. The purses haven't changed. The schedule is now more internationally focused, so these players have to travel more. Yeah, they can take private jets on stuff. That's still a long way to go. And they're going to play their next event in Hong Kong. Your first 4 events are not in the United States. And then you really don't get back to the U.S. until the summertime for a tournament, which, the Miami event, I guess, for the Masters, but not so great of a schedule in terms of being convenient to a player to go in and out really quickly. Meanwhile, all the guys who are playing TGL, the PGA Tour, they've got an easy commute. They stay in the country. They fly back down to Florida. They play TGL. They get a chance to play for free money. They hit 15 shots each, and then they go play whatever signature events they want to play. Easy, very easy for them. And I think the tour has kowtowed enough to those players now, the top players, that their lives are easier, demonstrably easier, and started to kind of change the conversation. And I think what the PGA Tour is kind of sitting on, and what they've been sitting on this entire time, to be candid, is the reality that LIV has to make some decisions in the next several months. And the decisions really center around the future of their league. Can they spend enough money to re-sign Brooks Koepka and Bryson DeChambeau and whoever else of those expiring contracts they want to keep? And if they can't do it, what then? If you lose Brooks, if you lose Bryson, you lose one of the two, take your pick, then you lose some credibility as a league. Who you replace them with is not going to be as good as them, as popular as them, as relevant as them. They're just not going to be there. So if that happens, that's a big deal, right? And I think that reality probably has to set in. Now, there's a podcast out there called the Pool Hook Podcast. They have some connections to LIV. They're trying to report that Bryson has declined a contract extension with LIV. They threw out an enormous number. I have no idea whether that's accurate or not. Any of it, right? I don't know those people personally. I know they've got some LIV connections, so I think there's at least some tenuous reason to believe there's some validity to it. even if the numbers are fudged. And I think almost all the numbers on LIV are kind of fudged to a degree. However, if that is a true sentiment that Brooks or Bryson said, I've had my fun. I've got my LIV title. I've got my U.S. Open, my second U.S. Open. I've got my access to the majors moving forward. I found a way to make money. I found a way to break in the mainstream. I want to go play against PGA Tour players again and go play against the Scheffler, go play against the McIlroy. I don't think that's necessarily a slam on Jon Rahm or Tyrrell Hatton, who are probably the other two most relevant players on LIV these days. So much as to say, I think what they have built hasn't lived up to what they promised. No world ranking points. Not that really means anything to those two guys. No wealth inherent to the team model. That never really manifests itself. And the actual prize money they can make, comparable between the two tours. Really, it all comes down to the signing bonus. And if you're not going to sign me for about the same amount of money, if not a little bit more, to sustain your league, because now it's a one-on-one buyer. It's also a one-on-one seller in the case of both of these guys. They know what they mean to live and to live alone, right? At the time, they negotiated back and forth for large sums of money with some leverage, a significant amount of leverage to leave the PGA Tour. Now they have a different, and I believe, better leverage, because if they leave, you can't replace them. You can't get them back, right? You got to throw a ton of money at them to get them back, even more than you did before, because you know what they mean to your brand. And if they leave, their replacements are not nearly as good. And I think the same thing kind of happens with Phil Mickelson or Dustin Johnson. Those guys straight up want to retire. They wanted the money so they could walk away when it was done. Well, if it's done and they walk away, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if they go to the PGA Tour or just retire. That they don't play on LIV matters. And if they have to replace those guys, again, name players, they're gone. So you're really left with guys that signed after LIV started. You got Cam Smith, who really hasn't lived up to the potential that he showed in that 2022 season, playing as well as he did, going and getting 2 huge titles, getting a major championship. He hasn't lived up to that, quite to that standard. And that's not a knock on the guy. It's hard to do, but that's the reality of it. So if that's the case, then what does LIV look like without a bunch of those guys? Well, now you've got to backfill with younger guys, cheaper guys that aren't name recognizable. Well, Fox isn't going to like that. MBS isn't going to care for that as much. And the PGA Tour knows it. So they can kind of wait it out and go, well, if those guys don't sign and they come back to us, we can just value this. We can value ourselves at more, right? Instead of $12 billion, let's call it $14 billion. You want to put in that $1 billion and get a board seat to PGA Tour Enterprises. Well, it's going to cost you $1.5 billion now. And maybe you don't get the chairman's seat. There's a lot of different things that could play into this. But I think it really is an interesting talking point that LIV could run its own course with its own players deciding it runs its own course instead of the Saudis deciding that it's running its own course and that they fold it into the PGA Tour. And, of course, neither can happen and both could happen, right? The Saudis and the PGA Tour could come to a deal and they all decide, hey, we're going to fold up LIV into this kind of weird fall series or something, or a team series, or who knows? I mean, you could have a LIV series attached to the signature events. I mean, there's all kinds of universe of things that can happen. I don't think Donald Trump's involvement, especially with all the other stuff that's going on right now, is really going to play that much of a factor. They've got to figure this out for themselves. Jay Monahan said today at the Arnold Palmer Invitational, talking to a small group of reporters. Shout out to Jason Sobel for the information there. And he's got a new gig at CBS Sports. Happy for him. But Monahan said they do not expect to have any kind of deal in place by next week to announce for the Players' Championship. So we know that's not coming. I think everyone kind of knew that. But there was also rumor reporting out there that, a LIV player said that the PGA Tour could invite players from LIV to compete at the Players as soon, back of the PGA Tour as soon as the Players. That was never going to happen. Not in a million years was that going to happen. And I think they probably started that with the hopes of kind of riling things up a little bit, just to kind of see who spreads the rumors. But I could see a world where if an agreement is reached, you kind of tepidly bring back a couple of guys. But if those couple of guys just come back to the PGA Tour anyway, with their membership intact, maybe we don't need them as much. But it's an interesting topic now that that's kind of been brought up. All right, let's talk a little bit about Jordan Spieth. So Jordan Spieth is not in the Arnold Palmer Invitational field this week, right? He is not one of the 72 players in the field. Young guy named Jackson Koivoon, who, if he makes the cut, quote unquote, top 50 in ties, and any guy within 10 shots of the lead, so you just got to be within reason. You're going to get to the weekend. That gets him to a PGA Tour card. Luke Clanton did it last week in contending at the Cognizant Classic. Koivoon could do the same thing here this week, put him in a place where he gets a PGA Tour card through what's known as PGA Tour U Accelerated, where you get points based on your amateur, professional, and PGA Tour achievements as an amateur player and as a collegiate player. And that would be a great thing. It'd be great for this tournament. It's almost a guaranteed milestone. I mean, I think he is good enough to do it. I mean, of course, he could miss the cut, but I think he's got a good chance. And you don't have Spieth or Ricky Fowler in here. Spieth got exemptions into Pebble and into the Genesis. And I think it made sense to give him exemptions into those things. But now, kind of turning it around, he didn't get any exemption into this event. And Sam Saunders, who's Arnie's grandson, talked about that and reasons why. And then Jordan Spieth kind of said at the end of Cognizant, well, I guess they didn't play good enough injured golf to get an exemption. Well, this is the new PGA Tour, right? And there were so many complaints last year about guys like Webb Simpson and Abscott, board members, policy board members, getting exemptions into these events, getting opportunities to play where a lot of their peers said, well, that's not warranted. That's not necessary. We're going to expand the fields. Let's expand it to people who are playing well now, not guys who have access to the board. And I think maybe that has kind of started to filter through a little bit. Hopefully it has, where these signature events can say, look, yes, you are a named player, but if you're not playing well now, maybe you had a rough year last year for injury concerns or whatever reason, we don't have to just slot you in and take an opportunity away from hungry players who are playing well now, who otherwise don't have access. Think about the Andrew Novaks of the world, guys who have had really good years so far, and this may be their one and only. It may be the start of a long-term thing. We don't know, but it's not our job to decide. If you put those players in who are playing well now, you match them with the superstars and the guys who played well last year, you've got a better field than just kind of plucking guys by hand and going, well, people know you and people know you, and therefore you're going to get into the event. Ricky Fowler had himself a nice Cognizant Classic, not good enough to get in this field. Again, the whole old saying of the last 5 years, play better. Just play better. And I think it's interesting that Spieth now talks about it as though he should have gotten an exemption in kind of that snarky tone, as opposed to the same kind of, I guess, tone or maybe a different kind of tone of gratitude toward getting into the Genesis Invitational Tour and Pebble Beach before that, which that made more sense, right? He got in, right? I mean, he's an AT&T guy. Of course he was going to get in. Genesis made sense. He's participated in the board. He knows Tiger. They've got a relationship. Okay, well, that's fine. But maybe it's not the same way at API. It depends on who you know, right? That's what these sponsor exemptions are for. So I don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for Spieth. I think it makes him sound somewhat entitled in a strange way. And he really has never acted a ton like that. I'm Jordan Spieth. I should get an exemption over XYZ player. But I think it also does kind of make the case to a small degree to keep these tournaments at a relatively small level. And I know that flies in the face of things I've said before. I'd like there to be a 90-player minimum for these events. However, if you keep them at this kind of 72, 75, 78 level, you create these kinds of chum situations where Spieth didn't play well enough. Fowler didn't play well enough. I'm sure other guys didn't play well enough that don't immediately come to mind. If you want to get in these things, then you got to go play the in-between events. You got to go play the regular events. You got to go do well in the swing 5 or the next 10. Or you got to go win a tournament. You got to go do something significant to improve your standing and get in these $20 million tournaments. I think that is a good thing. I think that is a net positive. Can you still simultaneously expand the fields a little bit and still get results like that? I don't know. That's something to figure out. And it doesn't sound like the PGA Tour's intent on changing field sizes anytime soon, so maybe it's all rendered a moot point. Play better, get in the fields, give yourself a chance. All right, last point for this week, or today's show, rather. TGL playoffs are set. Got those set last night. Watched the 3 p.m. match and the 7 p.m. match over on ESPN2, I think, for both of them. Really enjoyed both matches were very good. The second match was especially entertaining because Boston Common got to a point after the triples, the first 9 holes of 15 in the TGL format, where they had to win every hole of singles to be able to give themselves a chance to get in the playoffs. If they won every hole, they would have a hole winning differential or number of holes won compared to their opponent that evening from New York to be able to get in the playoffs. That made for some compelling TV. They won a couple of holes. They started to get excited and then kind of blew up in their face a little bit. They didn't play poorly. They just got beat by a better team that night. But I now have a playoff system. They have 6 teams. 4 get in the playoffs. The 2 teams who are not in are Rory McIlroy's Boston Common and Tiger Woods' Jupiter Links. They have 1 remaining regular season match, and that involves the Jupiter Links taking on the Atlanta Drive. So that is effectively a meaningless match, but Tiger plays, so they've got that. And then after the Players' Championship, they will have their playoffs. So they'll have that over 2 days of 2 semifinal matches, and then they will have a best-of-3 final series between the 2 teams that win their semifinal matches. There's still a lot of money on the line here. I think the winning team gets like $2 million a player, so it's not like they're playing for full money. This is a substantial sum of money available to the players. I've enjoyed the increased competition, the quality of the competition. It's been really fun to watch. I was hoping to get down there while I was in Orlando last week, and it just wasn't going to work. But I would like to get down there and check out a tournament. They've done a really good job with this. I think that the playoffs will be a little bit more interesting because there's more consequences to it. I think so far the knock on TGL is that there's nothing to it, right? I mean, the same knock on Live Golf. But we'll see that maybe a little bit better in a playoff setting, just like I feel like you see a little bit better when Live plays the team championship. It's so much more entertaining than the regular week-to-week individual product because you attach some meaning to it by having a team, even if it's one event, even if it's a couple of games, whatever it is, as opposed to individual things that you can kind of just blow off. And so I think the playoffs are going to be pretty good for TGL. We'll see what happens. Obviously, the quality of competition matters. We don't want blowouts. We want close matches and all that stuff. But an overall first regular season almost done, hugely net positive. I think you'll bring in some more players next year, maybe some more teams. Sure seems like with a bunch of different NFL owners and other Major League Sports owners showing up at SoFi Center, that there is some hope for expansion for this league. What that looks like, what next year looks like, who knows? But year one has definitely been a positive for TGL. That's going to do it for us today on the show. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. I really appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow with another show, and we'll talk about getting ready for API. We got a big week. Basically a full schedule, full slate, full boat of tournaments. We've got the Blue Bay LPGA in China. We've got Live in Hong Kong. We've got the DP World Tour and the Sunshine Tour in Johannesburg. We've got the Korn Ferry Tour in Chile. We've got the Champions Tour out west. Full boat this week. Lots to talk about, plenty to get into with you, and we just scratched the surface today. You can watch us on Golf News Net TV on Roku. You can watch us as well on Free Live Sports and Freecast, as well as on YouTube or social channels. And you get a hold of me on social media at Ryan Ballingy or by email at ryan@thegolfnewsnet.com. Thank you so much for spending some time with me once again. And we'll talk to you next time on 2 Off the First.